welcome the new members. We have a couple of new members, and I don't know if they're going to be present, but I just want to make sure that they all know that this recording will be uploaded to Module 6 on the website this afternoon as soon as I'm done with the recording. And I want to welcome the new members. I think I already said that, but I'm not sure. And I want to remind everyone who may be listening to this and not present here, something that I have said in the past, but it's worth reiterating, that the sessions, the monthly sessions and the monthly lessons are not related. And so you may hear me ask a question or two during the sessions that may reflect some of the frameworks that we work, that I describe in the lesson, but they're not related. They're not meant to be related. They're just two different things. And you know, some people have trouble. Some people have more time to listen to the sessions. Some people have more time to listen to the lesson. Some people do both, but they're not related. And finally, the Q&A Zoom call is about the module content of the month, and it happens 3 weeks after the module is released. And the office hour is usually about anything else, whether it's about your own cases, and that one is not recorded. Okay, so we have I have released module 6, and I'm wondering if you want to have any questions, or if you find these, well, first I want to go over some questions. Module 6 had 2 sessions with a couple that, well, if you heard it, then you know about the challenges. And so I wonder if you have any questions about that or about the lessons. What do you think you want to do?
Thank you for the reminder that they're not necessarily linked, because a bit of me was trying to link the narrative therapy to that session, even though you've said that before, so I appreciate the reminder. I was struck in the first session, especially on the couple of points where you really just very directly kind of went at what they were doing. You know, when she said, I think you said she was, I don't remember the cause of it, but she would go to preaching when she felt scared or something. I guess I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but just noticing that would involve, I'm guessing, a lot of trust on their part in you, you know, because she seemed to take it. And I thought, oof, you know, with the other one, I think sighed or something when you said it. You know, sort of, I think the husband said, oh, wow, you know, but it seemed like it was accurate from your experience of them. I wondered, I guess, how long you've been working with them when that happened.
Okay. And I think, Michael, you had a very similar reaction to that comment.
I did. So
I heard from Michael that he had a similar reaction sometime after the release.
Yeah, I find myself kind of, it's a valuable feedback to give a client, or perhaps an interpretation of what's happening, but I find myself feeling a little guarded in doing that because I'm worried about the therapeutic alliance, or I'm worried about them walking away from the session and feeling perhaps judged or criticized. And I don't think she took it that way from you in the session, but in my mind, as I was listening, I was kind of thinking, wow, I'm not there yet. My comfort level with some of my couples, some of them that I've been working with over a year, I feel absolutely comfortable kind of saying, hey, this, you know, I'll do it in my own way. But I think it's harder for me to feel confident. I think there has to be a right setting, or something in the session has to feel, I have to feel empowered to do that. So I appreciate you taking that risk with that couple and kind of demonstrating how you do it.
Yeah, so Should I comment on what you're commenting now, or should I wait till I hear a little more of your questions? What do you think? Do you have other questions, Michael?
I actually do. I'm just wondering, have you used the vulnerability cycle often with couples, or is that something that was just like unique to this couple you're working with? I've actually started to utilize it this week, so I fumbled a little bit. I've found that with some partners, they'll go into more storytelling about other examples, and I have to constantly redirect and sort of, I think I like your phrase of using the headlines to like, just tell me the headlines and let's get to a little bit more about what you're feeling when this is happening. And I notice if I ask a partner, if I'm thinking of one I did yesterday, he was um, really focused on what she might have been feeling, but not what he was feeling. And so I'm constantly redirecting as that's happening. Um, and similarly, the female partner, this is a heterosexual couple, the female partner was just saying, I feel nothing. I'm completely shut off from him. I'm checked out. I don't even like you anymore. And then I had to repair part of that. So I felt like um, part of it was me, but part of it was the recent argument that was kind of leading up to it. I've noticed, so I've done it probably like 4 times this week. So I've noticed that if I work on a more benign argument, that like it's just like, I didn't like his reaction about, our plans for the weekend, as opposed to a little bit more of a core issue that I've been working on with him. The more like that first example seems to go much better, and then I can relate it to how it's kind of reflecting what's happening in their other arguments. So I'm just kind of playing with it for now to see how I can use it. So I don't know.
So I will have something to say about that. So thank you, Michael. How about you, Carolyn? Anything else?
I think I can hold for now, is what I would say. Yeah, there's some other things percolating, but let's start here.
Okay. So, so in terms of the words preaching, it's interesting that both of you have had reactions to me saying the word preaching to her and not jerk to him, which I also use. So I don't know if that's if that has any significance or not, but I was, but maybe it is because he used the word jerk and she hadn't used the word preaching. Maybe that's why you reacted to my saying to her and not to him. That is a possibility. But but you're right, Carolyn. It does involve trust. Absolutely. If you don't have that trust, I would not be allowed to do that. It wouldn't go well. I've been working with them for, I think, on and off, maybe over 2 years. And we're at the point now where I don't think this is good. But they only want to come once a month, and I think you've heard that in the session. And I think they're getting a lot better, but their regressions are also not good. In fact, I think they had another regression not too long ago. I offered more sessions. And they didn't take me up on it, and so I don't know. But I think finances are an issue. I have not discussed with them maybe going to another therapist. They're not there yet. I have done that with other people that I work for a long time that I think need some more work. But anyway, so yeah, I've been working with them for a couple of years. It does involve a lot of trust, and something I do in the very early stages of treatment You might have heard me say that in the early sessions, in the early modules, but I do a lot of, do I have your permission to interrupt? Do I have
Mhm.
your permission to use a certain word? What would you call what just happened and how you get? So I generally have them, I think the reason why he was able to say a jerk is because I have asked that question before. How do you think you get? What do you think happens to you? And when you get triggered like that, how do you think you act? And so the word stubbornness and jerk came from him.
Mhm.
And we have used the word preachy with her before. Um, and this was not the first time that she gets bossy and preachy, and we've talked about it. So, but what I'm interested, so that explains what I did and why. And but you're both reacting to it in the sense that, oh, that is so much of a risk, or oh, that could damage the therapeutic alliance, or, how do I? And so in order to get better as a couples therapist and to, continue to evolve and continue to grow, it would be maybe interesting for you to think about what is so risky, what would be a barrier, um, to naming things. What is your history with naming in your own relationships?
Mhm.
Um, what is your history with having named growing up? Like so if we think about this as a naming of the behavior,
Mhm.
when you do this, you get this way. Um, and many people are uncomfortable with that. Many people grow up in conflict avoidant households. Many people have conflict avoidant relationships. Many people are not able to name the behavior of the other. So if there's anything that I think would be if there's anything that I think would be a progress that I have not talked about in these sessions that I think I would want to do, is that as the witness to their behavior, I am the one doing the naming.
Mhm.
But if they're going to make any progress, the naming has to come from the partner.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, in other words, it is up to the partner to say, hey, you're getting disrespectful. Hey, you're getting preachy. Hey, you're getting bossy. Hey, cut it up. So I am the witness, and during the treatment process, I slowly intend to go from me doing the naming, being the witness, to them, to the partner naming, and the other one accepting the naming and accepting the feedback.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
the next step that I did not show on the tape. That's
Mhm.
not there. But in some sessions, in that's where my head goes. So yeah, and and for her, it would be to name. This is again to be able to stop the cycle, right? And for her to be able to say, um, you're becoming a jerk right now. Can you cut it out? Can we take a break? Can we, so,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
she needs to be able to do that.
Yeah, one of the things that struck, I think one of the things that made that point strike me was that it felt like, although I think I tend to say things, if I were saying something like that, probably softer than you said it, although maybe not, if I were in that session, I never know. Sometimes I say things that I think, oh, okay. But I might say, you have the quality of the way you're speaking has the quality of sounding as if you're a preacher or a teacher of some kind. Is that what you're intending? Might be what I would do. But what I really liked about what you did and what made me notice it is it seemed to really sort of shift the dynamic between them, where he's the jerk. That's sort of an acceptable thing. It sounded like in the narrative although I'm listening to one session, and she's kind of good, and not a problem. And you said, wait a minute.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you're bringing that up because that is exactly her position.
Oof, yeah.
There's something wrong with her and I'm superior. Look at all the work I'm doing. Look at all the progress I'm making. I mean, that is exactly right.
Okay.
So, which is why it was even more important. I mean, when she gets preachy, that's where she's coming from a position of superiority. From a position as that was my impression too.
Yeah.
And I want to say something else about doing it this way, about the naming that well, first of all, it comes later in the process, like I said earlier. Actually, I think what I wanted to say is go back to the vulnerability cycle, but I'm going to wait a second. So let me go back to the question I was asking you before, that the risk is great, and one may become, this is you're right, this is a very direct confrontation. And there are many types of confrontation. Some are softer, some are more indirect. I mean, we need to be able to do all of them, and including the more direct confrontation. And I'm wondering, if you don't have to tell me your barriers to direct confrontation, but I would encourage you to, given your level of experience and given your the risk taking, that you would look at, are there barriers in your way of work to direct confrontation? And where are they coming from, and why do they happen, and when do they happen, and when do you feel most triggered and more afraid and most at risk? So I would encourage you to look at that. That's a really important piece for your continued, getting better and growth and development. Do you have any comments about that?
Oh, feels certainly true in general, right? We get stuck on the stuff that's hard for ourselves if we're in there. Yeah.
Right.
It's also it makes me think just about how the narrative does play out with one person in a dominant sort of position earlier on, probably in a relationship, and you really have to attend to what's their dynamic between them, and kind of find ways to feed that back to them. Of in this scenario, you're doing everything right. You're really trying. I am thinking of a client I think I spoke with about a couple of sessions back, of a couple where there's very much a dynamic where the one partner feels that she's more insightful and she's better able to articulate her feelings, and she has better control of how she expresses things. And her partner is just a lump, in her opinion, and slowly evolving emotionally. And upsetting that balance is taking a lot of work, because the partner who feels that she's very insightful is also very controlling, and they're kind of evenly matched in terms of bad behavior, I would say, actually. But one takes a lot of, the person who's being described as less emotionally evolved takes a lot of responsibility for all the errors, and the other partner says, yep, that's right. You've done that wrong. And so,
well, this is
yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's beautiful, because I was going to say that's the biggest risk of naming. The biggest risk of naming is that the other person will use it against it.
Yeah.
That is a risk, and that needs to be weighted and taken into consideration. And with this couple, though, the risk is for her to use the information he gains against him. The information she gains, or he gains, about himself against him. The risk is that she's done that. In fact, she's done it since the last time, which after this session, she's done it again. And that's what the last crisis was about, although he handled it much better than he would have in the past. But she will say things to him like, see, or I don't know how she does it, but she does it in a very pejorative way, and
Mhm.
she uses the information. So he and I are working in the session really hard. Like after, and I don't remember the end of the second session, but I spend the second session just mostly working with him.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know if you heard the second one. Did you hear the second one?
Yeah, yeah.
So I spend the second one mostly working with him. And I missed listening again to the last 5 minutes. So I don't know if she does it then. I can't remember, but she does that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I don't know. I wonder what you think of this. I sort of just developed a habit of, I have a couple of like little lectures I feel like I give people of, if your partner is vulnerable, you don't get to beat them with that
that's
information.
right.
You know, that
And
this is
and
like,
I don't think I've done that enough with this
yeah.
couple. And I will next time I see them, because I know that that happened in between the last session and the one I'm going to have
Mhm.
upcoming next week. I know that that happened. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I haven't said that enough
Mhm.
to them, and now that we're going a little deeper with her work and with his work, I haven't said it enough. So
Mhm.
thanks for the reminder.
Oh gosh, well, I say it all the time to this couple, and it's not very successful. I mean, the tenacity of someone's desire, to be right can be impressive, is what I would say.
Absolutely.
She's very, she'll say, yes, you're right. Good reminder, Carolyn. And yet,
Right. I know.
okay. I know yeah.
It's not easy work.
I
And
know.
should I move on? Michael, did you have anything you wanted to say about what we're talking about, or?
No, I guess I appreciate what you're both describing. I think it's the naming piece, and then having, if that partner A is then expressing it to partner B being able to be receptive to that feedback and saying, hey, I am triggering something here. Can I
Mhm.
modify my behavior? Can I adjust? Can I reflect on that? Do I want to respond differently? And I think that that's
Mhm.
always the struggle. It's sort of like, for some, it'll be, they go into that cycle of like, my survival strategy kicks in, and then I'm going to become defensive, or
Mhm. Mhm.
really criticize you, and or emotionally cut off. So
That's really interesting in that, I mean, it makes me think that you need both partners to have some sort of emotional stability, right? To be able to stand that kind of feedback of, when you're doing this, I'm responding in this way. And for both of them have to be able to sort of stay present and say, okay, I'm looking, like you're saying, instead of moving into a defensive posture or kind of back into a pattern. I find that troubling, hard sometimes when I feel like, I mean, which is maybe all the time, right? There's not an evenly matched pair oftentimes. Like someone might have had a lot more
mhm.
therapy than the other person, or be a little sturdier emotionally and able to hear criticism when the other one, really sticks to their story. That's maybe a question I have of, I feel like that's a challenge for me, of the capacity of one person is a little less, right? Like they're a little more defensive, they're a little more vulnerable. They just don't kind of come out of themselves and say, hey, wait a minute, and even if I, like in this pair, I guess I oftentimes will say to the partner, I don't think that actually you should take all of the blame here. I hear how much you want to take responsibility for the yelling, the throwing something, whatever, that's great. I have no criticism of that, but I also think you're not 100% responsible for everything that's happened in this moment. And she'll say, yes, I am. Kind of. And I think, okay. And
Well,
yeah,
that's a great comment. And yes, you're right. Some
yeah,
couples, some individuals have more capacity than others, and part of
yeah,
our work is to increase their capacity. And we do it in various ways. We do it
yeah,
by separating, we're doing by individual work,
yeah,
we're doing it
yeah.
by individual work in front of the couple. So yes, that
Mhm.
definitely. So one you've heard me say this before, one way of doing this is to figure out what is in each of their sidewalks. So here, what is it that he has to develop more of? And what is it that partner B has to develop more of? So they're very, very different. There's a lot of confusion about, what when we are able to successfully work with the vulnerability cycle, we can look at the vulnerabilities, which is what I was trying to do in the second session with him. Like, why do you become a jerk? Well, because I don't want to disappoint her. And where is that coming from? This fear of disappointing her. Well, I didn't want to disappoint my parents. Okay, so now so you see what I mean, that a part of what I'm doing with him is to see if I can help him develop the capacity to tolerate disappointing her more. And he was really good at explaining to me what the risk was. So one of the risks was disappointing her. And it took me a while to get there, because I was more thinking of the risk being more that she would withdraw her love and attention, which is what she does, right? She does abandon him, but the risk is that he will disappoint her, and that's the work there, that to develop his capacity to be okay even if he disappoints her. So I don't know if that responds to your, you're right. There are sometimes there are different stages of, emotional regulation development, but sometimes it's a question of what each needs to be, what each needs to do differently, and they're different. They're not the same.
Yeah, that's a very helpful reminder when you just said that, of like thinking about what each person's trajectory is and finding ways to state that. And it surprised me as well when he said I thought that's really a beautiful opening up of his perspective. I didn't expect that either. I thought, oh, huh.
It is beautiful. It is. I'm surprised I almost missed it. And I stayed with the questions. What's the risk? What's the risk? And I wanted to go back to that and say that you've heard me repeat things, and I wonder if you have any if you had any reactions or comments to that, because in the first session I repeat. So tell me with your own words. So how did the vulnerability cycle work? How did the cycle work? How did you get into the cycle? I think I asked that like 4, 5, 6 times in the session. And I can tell you why I did it, but I wondered if you have any comments about that. And in the second session, I do that again. So what's the risk? So the risk is, so what was the risk again? Until he can articulate it so that I can get it and she can get it. So do you have any, and I'll talk a little more about the use of the vulnerability cycle in a minute, Michael, which is what you asked for. But I wonder if you have any reactions to the repetition of the request.
I think if just thinking about like the narrative approach of naming or externalizing part of the dynamic of the problem, that's a great way of, you're calling it the cycle, but if I'm working within a narrative approach, I might have them name what the cycle is. So if like we get into the mud, right, or whatever, I don't know what they might call it, but if I can kind of get them, how'd you get back in the mud?
They call it a tip.
Oh, okay. So, and then I can just really use that and reminds, like I might say in a future session, sounds like you got back in the mud, or whatever it might be that they call it a tip, right? So I appreciate you identifying. I guess I hadn't picked up on that you were using that's the cycle, but I thought perhaps maybe it's part of the exercise that you've been doing with them, but it makes sense. So then they can identify it's happening too.
Right, because I don't want to be the one explaining it. I want them to explain it to me and to each other, so they can, what Daniel Weil says about that. He was an amazing therapist, and he said that what we're doing as couples therapists is building a platform from which they can observe their own cycle, which is a little bit of an it's an externalization technique. And in that way, it connects to the narrative couples therapy framework that I talk about. But if they can look at their own cycle and how the TIF develops, how it starts, how it ends, how they get into it, how they repeat it. If they can look at that, then they'll see, in Susan Johnson's terms, they'll see that the cycle is the enemy and not themselves. So that's part of what I'm trying to do. So can I go and talk about your other question, Michael? And by the way, I am always concerned when there's few people and few questions that what we're talking about that puts more pressure on you guys. So there's only the two of you, and that puts more pressure. So I just wanted to name that.
Okay. We're getting a private seminar.
Yeah. Well, that's one way of thinking about it. Sure.
I should let you know too. Todd let me know he might drop in a little later. He had to take a family member to a doctor's appointment, so he might show up suddenly.
And yeah, and in the beginning, I was trying to see if I could change the time of the meetings every month. And then I decided that they should be the same, so people know in advance. And in fact, I just send all the dates. So I would love to increase the participation, but I don't mind it if it doesn't. I think that some of the questions that you're asking today and the answers will be very valuable to anybody who hears this. So I'm not concerned about that, but I think I was more concerned about the two of you being the only ones here. But if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. Can I talk about the vulnerability cycle? The question, Michael, you ask is, do I use it often? That you used it and you fumbled. I fumbled too. With some couples, it's a little easier to use it. With others, with some couples, it just flows beautifully from one. But so the first thing I want to say is this. This is not the only tool that you can use to help couples understand the vulnerabilities, the cycle. Not the only tool, it's one tool. And I think it's a really, really good one, but it's just one. And there are others. And I'll talk more about that maybe today. But I know it's an upcoming modules too. But it is a second stage piece of the work. This is not generally a first stage piece of the work. So I think that the strengthening of the alliance, the solution-focused approaches, the narrative approaches, the focus on strength and talents and what works is the first order of business when we're working with couples. And I don't know that everybody agrees with me on that, but this is part of what I believe. This is why I have such a strong alliance. That I start with the frameworks that I consider to be more amenable and more suitable for the first stage of the treatment process, which is the stage of the creation of the alliance, where they each believe that I can be helpful, that I see them, that I understand them, that I know what's going on with them, that I understand their experience. So, I start with the solution focused and the narrative, then I move on to, what in the words of Mona Fishbein, who got them from another author, is called multi-partiality. So it's not that you are, what's the other word that people use? It's not that you are neutral. It's not neutrality. It's not neutrality. It's multi-partiality. You're not, I'm not neutral. I try to understand each person's experience from their point of view, and understand a la EFT what is the feeling behind the experience, so that then I can link it to the behavior. So this is first stage work. Talents, what's working, how do they not fight, how do they avoid a fight, how do they get better, how do they, all of those things, how do they it's a stabilizing work. Do they spend any time together? Anyway, so you've seen all that material, and now, next module you'll see the EFT, which goes a little deeper. And then in the second stage of the treatment, so let me back up. In the first stage of the treatment, you're linking the feeling to the behavior that comes out of the feeling. When I feel lonely, I disconnect from you. When I feel attacked, I attack you back. So the first order of business is to try to get at understanding what they do, what their triggers are, and what they do. And then when the alliance is really strong, then you can move on to family of origin, trauma, the vulnerability cycle. Then you can move on to, how did this come about? What are the attachment injuries in the relationship that trigger the cycle and the behavior? And what are the early attachment injuries or the early attachment things that give you either an avoidant or an insecure attachment style, that this is what you bring into the relationship? So the link between this is how it happened, and this is how I reacted to what happened, and this is how it's happening now. To me, that's a second stage of the treatment. And so you see that in my work with the male member of the couple, where what I'm trying to do is say to him, look, you were afraid of disappointing your father. Now you're afraid of disappointing your wife. Even though she's not your father, you're still acting as if you were 10 years old. That's the work of the second stage of the treatment. Did I say something that I'd like to hear some comments about what I'm saying?
The first thing that was striking me just as you're saying that is that I think a lot of times we don't even get to the second stage of treatment with couples, right? That we're focused so much on that first part of what happens here and there. And it's a good reminder, again, to kind of not let that get lost, of let's stop and attend to, how this is constructed in your own psyche and where it came from and all the things you're saying.
Right, because that's the intrapsychic work versus the interpersonal work. And if you cannot calm down the system, it's hard to get there. It's very hard to get there. Now, I don't know how I know other therapists don't work like that. I know other therapists work directly with the early imprint and the way in which I don't know that has not worked for me. I know that analysts work like that too, like that sometimes, and that some intergenerational people work like that, some imago people work like that. Those are frameworks that I'm going to be talking about later. It doesn't work for me as a first stage of treatment. There
do you
are
mean,
some exceptions, but in
okay.
general, it doesn't. What's the
Oh,
question?
I was trying to understand what you're saying of what doesn't work for you. This idea that people would go to the base, to the interpersonal or the intrapsychic first. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Right, that they will go there first
Okay.
when they are in high distress and which is a response to what you were saying about sometimes you don't get there.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't always get there. Some people quit therapy after 6 sessions, 10 sessions, and they don't do the other work.
Mhm. It also is a good reminder to me not to miss going to the intrapsychic, if even if we're a year in, for instance, if they're, because sometimes they're comfortable in continuing to talk through the dynamics of what's happening at home or the ways that they fight, to kind of remind myself, okay, wait, if we haven't moved into this next stage,
Right.
to push folks there.
That is a good reminder, and I need that reminder to myself. So we all need that reminder because we have a tendency to go where they want to go, which is
Right.
stay with the issues of the day, the fight of the day, the dynamic. And so yeah, at some point we need to create this lens, open up the lens of family of origin, early trauma, uh, attachment injuries within the relationship. Um, you saw in module 5 what I did with that when I got, I talked about the injuries. But anyway, continuing with this idea of getting there, the vulnerability cycle mapping is one way of getting there, but it's obviously not the only way. I think I'll be talking more about other ways in upcoming modules. And it's one I've been using, but it's not the only way.
I appreciate you going through first and second order of business. I was taking a little bit of notes and then I started to feel very overwhelmed just in terms of like, doing all this in the first stage while also holding the client and helping give them hope that they're working towards their vision of their relationship and building a rapport with them and structuring sessions and really kind of, there's a lot going on. And I think having sort of you just go through it really helps remind me of things that perhaps I can kind of attend to a little bit more intentionally as I work with some of my couples. I think it's tough because sometimes they're in such distress and then we start to make progress and then they regress. Something happens in between sessions and you're like, what happened? Because we were doing so well. So it's repairing and going back and forth.
Right. That's a very good point, Michael. So what I think I've been doing more and more of, so remember way back when I started talking about, you have to know what the treatment, once you gain experience, you have to know where you want to take them. You have to know where you want to take people in general, and you have to know where you want to take this particular couple in particular. And I do that more often than I used to, which is that I explain this to them. We're not going to do problem solving now. That's not going to happen. What we're going to do is this. You're not going to know what to do yet. You'll get there, but you're not going to know what to do yet. Here's what's going to happen first. And here's what's going to happen then. And then 2 months later, and you're going to make progress, and then you're going to regress. And I tell them that it's like treating an addict. They're addicted to their cycle, and they're going to regress. And then I talk about the brain, and I tell them why it is that they regress and why it is so hard. And so this is the psychoeducation part regarding not not only what makes relationships succeed or fail, which I've gotten good at, but not so good at lining up the stages for them.
Mhm.
You know, what is going to happen? Right now you're in pain, you want relief. This is how the relief is going to come. It's not going to come from this, this, and that. It's going to come from this or that. You know, whatever their case is. And I don't know you very well, I tell them. As I get to know you better, I'll know better what it is, what needs to happen.
Mhm.
I think why, and I also say to people, I don't know how long I'm going to work with you. I
Mhm.
don't know if you're going to pick for 10, 12, 20 sessions, or if you're going to work for 2 years with me.
Mhm.
I don't know what it's going to be. And I didn't used to say that because when I was more in my younger years, when I was more solution focused and more systemic, I thought the treatment was shorter.
Mhm.
I now know that they're not short if you're going to do good work. However, I don't know if they're going to stick with it.
Mhm.
And so I know that there's a certain amount of things that are not going to happen if they don't stick. I'm going to be able to stabilize them, but they're not going to stick. But if they don't stick, I'm not going to be able to get to the deeper issue.
Mhm. Mhm. I like that. I don't know that I do that enough, laying out the trajectory, because it at least also gives them a sense early on when they don't know us of, you know, what, even if they drop out, what might still be possible if they returned, right? So even if they drop out in 5 or 6 sessions, they might be
Absolutely.
which I.
And I think that kind of talk increases the alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she knows what she's talking about. Even if I have no idea what I'm talking about, in terms of I don't really know them, I don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
But it makes them feel like I know what I'm talking about, and it
Yeah.
increases their confidence.
Yeah, yeah. That we're thinking about it systematically, and we're.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
That we are thinking about it systematically, that we have done this before, that we have experience, that
Mm-hmm.
we can lay out and prognosticate and
Mm-hmm.
and that we know what's going to happen. This is
Mm-hmm.
going to be uncomfortable. This is not going to be. That's another piece of
Yeah.
okay, right? This is not
Mm-hmm.
going to be easy. Change is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but I do tell them a little more about the trajectory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's helpful.
So I wanted to talk based on your question, Michael, about the vulnerability cycle and this being a second stage more than a first stage. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to tell you. Oh, I do. So I don't know if you got to the end of the lesson in narrative therapy. And Michael, I was asking you for some feedback about him. So part of me wants to know how I did, but I want to talk about so if the types of questions were helpful, and I don't know if you remember them, so this is not a quiz, so if you don't remember it, don't worry. But I wanted to know if the types of questions were helpful, and also if you want to hear more about talking about therapeutic letter writing or using partners as witnesses, which are the couple of techniques that I have listed in the narrative couples therapy framework.
Mm-hmm. I like the questions. They just inevitably make me think about, you know, different things I haven't kind of gone through, or a slightly different way of phrasing it. And sometimes I feel like, oh, I phrase it differently, but they're all good reminders. So I appreciate that you give specific examples and specific kinds of points. And I also like your questions of like, think about a scenario and here's a problem to solve for yourself, depending on where you are in the progression of becoming a couples counselor. So I find them useful. I think they're helpful. And I would be interested in talking more, but I've never used therapeutic letter writing, so I'm happy to hear about that if you feel like you can talk about it.
Sure. Michael, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Sure. Um, so I do utilize therapeutic letters a lot. I guess um, probably not as much as
Let
early.
me say it for people who are
Sure.
listening to this, that Michael and I have known each other for a long time,
Okay.
and I know that he's got some training at the Narrative Couples Therapy Training Center in Evanston with Jean Combs and Jill Friedman, who are the ones who put narrative therapy on the map in the United States after training with Michael White and David Epstein.
Mhm.
So go ahead.
Sure. So the way I use the therapeutic letters is if I'm externalizing the problem with the client, I'll kind of write a lot of notes in the session, and then I'll sort of kind of synthesize some of the information that they're describing to me, how they've externalized the problem in their own language. I'll kind of even write up how it's impacting their mental health, how it's impacting their relationships, and then kind of thinking about, well, if this is a problem, then what is the project we're working towards? And this is coming directly from some of the letters that Jill and Jean have shared within the training, or how they might utilize it. So I've adapted it to my own. It's been really helpful. I've used it with individual and couples, but the majority of my work is with couples. So I then notice that couples will come back to it. So a couple I'm working with, probably I met with them this week, and they mentioned the problem. They were impacted by infidelity, and she said, it sounds like we're going back to that secrecy thing that happened. And that's what they named it. They named their problem secrecy in the relationship. And so it's really nice to kind of see how they kind of hold on to some of that narrative and say, it's further away from me now. That problem is further away. Or I had a client who, her problem that she externalized, she named it Donna. So every time she would have this problem come up, she's like, Donna's back in the room. Or Donna came up this week and I want to talk to you about it. So we can quickly kind of jump into the content without her having to feel like she's explaining it to me. And it's nice to see how they might utilize the project as something that they're working towards, their own vision of their own goals of what they'd like to work on together. So I think it can be really helpful. I've also utilized the reflective team approach, as having someone kind of sitting on a session. So I have some interns, or I have some of my staff that I supervise. From time to time, they'll come in and be part of a reflective team for a client that they don't have any history with. So the clients, I really work with them and they are comfortable with that. I might say, I'm having someone come in this week. Would it be okay if they sit in on a session with you? I don't give them any history of the client and let them hear what the client's bringing in today, and then leave time at the end. And we do an extended session. I leave time at the end where that person gets to share or reflect, what was it like to hear their story today, and what questions they may have, what narrative questions they may have for that client as they kind of continue, and and also what their thoughts are in bearing witness to the client's story today. And it's been really helpful. I've seen clients become more emotional in some of those sessions, and it's quite interesting, because I think it's because it heightens the experience of having someone else sit in the room. And not only I've been telling you, Michael, for many months, this is the problem, but having to say it again with someone new and hearing what their reflections are. So
Thank you, Michael, for saying all that. So I wanted to say to people who will be listening to this that when I was teaching the advanced couple and family counseling course before I retired for about 20 years, I taught the course in exactly the way that Michael was describing. So I had a couple come in, let's say it was a couple, and then we had a reflecting team, sometimes in the same room, sometimes in a different room, and we were connected by video. So the reflecting team were the other students, and they were listening into the couple. And so like about half hour, 45 minutes into the session, I would flip it. And now it was that the students were able to hear the couple. Now the system is that the couple can hear the students. And so the students are talking amongst themselves about the couple and what they just heard. And usually, very, very often, they had the reaction that Michael was just describing. They would get emotional. They would hear strengths that they didn't realize they had. They would hear validated. They would hear, um, they just heard amazing reactions. I'm struck by your strength. I'm struck by your by the ways in which you handle this or that. I wonder how you cope. So this is all coming from the narrative therapy perspective that I don't know if you remember seeing it in the write-up and in the lesson, that if the expectation that we have is that we're going to tell them what's wrong and that's going to be helpful, we are probably not going to make a lot of progress, especially in the beginning. And so that what makes progress, what gives an incentive to somebody to open up and say more about what's wrong is is the therapist's ability to see them from what gives them pride, what gives them strength. It's only through you think your therapist looks at you with positive eyes. It's only that way that the clients can feel free to open up. That's when they feel safe. That's when they feel seen. And the reflecting team, as well as the therapeutic letter writing, the reflecting team is much more powerful than the therapeutic letter writing. Of course, we don't have the ability to have a reflecting team, but the reflecting team is very, very powerful because it taps into precisely the aspects of the person that the other one doesn't seem to be seeing right now. And it taps into the aspects of the person that maybe nobody ever saw if there's a lot of trauma, you know, about coping, about surviving, about just and you can reframe so many things. Well, you didn't abandon your, I remember one reflecting team member said to a couple, well, you could have abandoned your children and you didn't. And that was a very powerful statement to one of the members of the couple that got her crying. And so I wanted to bring that up because this is again about first stage treatment versus second stage treatment. And that is what creates the alliance. And that is what allows for, the couple needs to believe that you see the goodness in them, that you see their strengths, that you see their talents, that you see the ways in which they cope with their hardships and their problems, in addition to many other things. And I wanted to say it out loud because, in the sessions with the couple, the first and the second, we're seeing a different kind of work. We're seeing a second stage work. We're not seeing the narrative therapy based work. So I wanted to make that contrast and bring it up. Yeah. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say about therapeutic letter. Oh, so the way I do, well, two things. So I don't have a reflecting team in like Michael does. And so I miss it because I did it for 20 years. And so part of what I do, and I don't know if you hear me do that, I'm trying to leave more silence in between so you could see the process. I don't know if you noticed, but I used to ask my audio editor to get rid of all the silences, and now I'm sort of leaving them there because I want you to see my process. Sometimes it's pausing, and I'm pausing and not talking. And part of what I'm doing is reflecting on what I'm hearing and trying to figure out where I want to go, which is not easy. And sometimes I tell them this. I don't know that you've heard me do that, but I tell them I need I don't know what to do. I need a few seconds to regroup and think about what just happened. And I need to think about what I want to tell you and do next. And that's my way of using my internal reflecting team. It's not exactly a reflecting team, but that is what I learned from doing the reflecting team, which puts a little distance and it models. I'm not saying the first thing that's coming out of my mouth. I'm not saying the first thing I want to say. I'm trying to think about what I want to say. So it's a modeling way for me to say, I have 5 things swirling in my head and I need to figure out which one I'm going to pick to do. So that's my version of the reflecting team. And my other version of the reflecting team is that I do write therapeutic emails, especially in the very beginning of the treatment process. When I'm getting to know the couple, I will use a form of externalization. So for example, with the couple that you just heard, you might have heard me say, I might have asked her to name what happens to her, and she may have said, I get bossy, and then I would have used an externalizing form, and I would have said, when bossiness comes into play, what happens? So that may have been one way that I would have used the externalization. And in an email, I could, again, I would talk about, here's what we accomplished today. This is what I see that we made the progress. I would talk about progress. I would talk about accomplishments. I would talk about patience. I mean, I write really, maybe not as much as I want to, but I write a lot in the beginning of the treatment process. I write emails to both of them. I think that strengthens the alliance. And they have the emails to go back to. It's also cut down on, I don't remember what we talked about last time. And so I tell them to read the email before the session, and if they haven't, I tell them to read it in the session. So the email is a really, really important tool to link between one session and the next. It highlights their strengths. It highlights their what their path. And I just wanted to tell you about that.
And Sarah, just because this is new to me, so maybe either of you are answering, do you write these letters to each person individually, or when you say you write to both of them, or do you write a letter to both of them together?
Michael?
For me, I write one letter and I actually read it to them in the next session.
Okay.
And then I will send it to them digitally. And that's just because there's certain things in the letter that I want to emphasize or would like to say in a certain way, because I worry about it getting lost in translation. And
sure.
I remember an individual I worked with, I had been working with him for 2 years. And then I gave him a letter and he became emotional and said, I knew that you were always here in my corner, but I really feel hurt. And I don't remember how he phrased it, but it just sort of felt, he felt like I really got him. And I was like, okay, we've been talking about this,
doing
but I had just been through the narrative therapy training, and I was just learning about the letters, and he was really impacted by that. And I really felt that. And then I lost him because of COVID. Not that as a client, I lost him as he just would not want to do Zoom. So I'm hoping that as things open back up, he'll
Mhm.
come back. So
Right. That is such a great example of the power of the written word.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what you're doing when you deliver it to the client in person is even better than what I do, which is to send an email. So, but you know, we each find our own way. And so I send emails. I don't do it enough. They have a very, very positive effect on,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and I have them read it to, each other. And I write it to both in answer to your
Ah,
question.
okay, that's helpful to know.
I
Yeah.
don't write them.
Separately, yeah. Mhm.
No, I may write separate emails, if I'm trying to problem solve, like, I have written separate emails.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I had a client last week who, in a discernment case, was getting triggered, but she realized she was getting triggered. And so she emailed me over the weekend and she said, I'm getting triggered by something that X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z is happening, and he's doing this and he's doing that. And I want to tell him this. What should I tell him instead? So I gave her some words,
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Sure.
she found it very helpful and was very, very grateful. So I do that too, but I wouldn't call that a therapeutic letter.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. I have another question, if you don't mind me asking all these questions about what you're already both doing. In the, I'm supposing from listening to how the, and now I've lost the term, but the groups listening to the session are instructed. It sounds like the instruction to the students or the folks who are listening is to hear the intention and the empathically understand what each person in the room is aiming for. Kind of, is that what they're reflecting back? The reflecting team is the word I was
Absolutely.
looking for.
That's
Okay.
a very good way of putting it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Reflecting on the intention,
Mm-hmm.
not the means, but the
Right.
intention.
Right. Okay. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Sort of what they're going for. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a great way of thinking about it, actually. Don't you think, Michael?
yes, sorry, I didn't realize that's something. Yes, I think I give them. It depends on how I might utilize the reflective team.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I might. So if I'm meeting with the both of you, I might say I'm gonna. I'm sorry, I'm meeting with you, and I might say I'm gonna turn to Sarah for a couple minutes, and I'm gonna just kind of have a conversation about what we discussed. So I might just do a direct consultation with her
Mm-hmm.
about my work with you today, and let you listen in on that. Or I might ask Sarah to speak directly to you, and I'll give her some specific prompts of like, is there anything that I do it in four sort of areas of like something to work towards validating or empathizing with your experience. The other one is, how is she personally impacted or professionally impacted by hearing your story today?
Okay.
That really helps me understand my work with my other clients who might be struggling with the same similar problems. So sort of normalizing that experience that you're having or bringing up today. Um, I'm drawing a blank. I don't remember what the other two are. Um, or perhaps if there's a story that it might remind them of. So I might be reminded of an experience that I also struggled with this problem if they wanted to kind of share that with you, if that person feels comfortable enough to do so. And I don't remember the fourth one. It's going to bother me.
Well, I actually have the same reaction because I haven't done reflecting teams in so long. I don't remember my instructions to them, but I think you're capturing. There's several ways of instructing your team. And what Michael is reminding me is what I used to do too, which is not only did I get the team, so you there are a couple of ways you can get if you have more than one reflector, so if you have two or more, they can talk amongst themselves about the couple. That's one thing they can do. Another thing they can do is they can talk to the couple, meaning give them messages.
Mhm.
This is what happened to me, and this is what I thought about when I heard you. This is what happened to me, and this is what I thought about when I heard you.
Mhm.
You can have the people talk amongst themselves.
Mhm.
You can have the people talk to the clients, or as Michael was saying, you could have you as the therapist and the reflectors can talk amongst yourselves about the clients.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I can have a conversation with my reflectors about what we all just heard.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's a fascinating framework. It's very, very powerful. And it definitely increases the alliance. It really strengthens the alliance. It does wonders for the alliance. So if you wonder why I can do the things I do with my clients and how I can talk like that, it's because I've done this kind of work in the very beginning with,
Mhm.
you know, multi-partiality and and reflecting kinds of things that come
Mhm.
from the narrative therapy framework.
Mhm.
Um, but I want to mention one more thing, that when Michael and I had an exchange this week after, or last week after after he heard the module, and again, remember, I know that he's gotten some training in narrative therapy. Um, I realized, I don't know if I told him that or I thought about it afterwards, I realized that from a narrative therapy perspective, I would not have used the word dick and the word bossiness. I would have used an externalizing word.
Mhm.
Um, or not bossiness, but preachy. You know, I said
Mhm.
it's preachy and we
Mhm.
him being a dick. That is probably not the tradition of a narrative therapist. And I didn't do that. And in part, I didn't do that for the reasons I gave earlier, because I think it's a great, because I don't think one size fits all.
Mhm.
I think it's a great tool. It's an amazing tool and framework for this first stage of the treatment.
Mhm.
But I do think we need to be able to name it, not that externalizing it makes it not so direct. I mean, it's great in the beginning,
Right.
but in my view, this is a personal view. You may not agree with this, or people listening to this may not agree with this, but in my view, like I said, I think I need to be able to name it. And I think I need to be able to have the couples name it for each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hear, I wonder if this is how I hear what you're saying in this way of, I think of the trajectory when I'm working with someone as the increased freedom I have as we have a deeper relationship in which we better understand each other, and I have more faith that they have the agency to correct me if I'm misunderstanding them, or will stand up to me. So as that deepens, I'm more and more what I would call shorthand. So I might say, you're being a dick, whereas early on I would say, you're giving the quality as if you want to demean her in this situation. Is that what you're trying to do? Kind of, but it's interesting. I mean, we're saying it differently, but I think, I
Yeah,
wonder if
but
it
it's the
plays out the
same
same.
thing. And the
Yeah.
way you're saying it is beautiful. That as their belief and safety increases, your ability to become more direct increases too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was beautiful. Yeah, I
Okay.
love it. I love it. And but you said something else which is really important, which is that I expect them to be able to tell me, no, that's not right. No, that's
Mm-hmm.
not exactly how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning of treatment, they can't do that.
Yeah.
But that is the trajectory, that they will be able to correct me and tell me, no, I didn't get the experience right. So I have to be a lot more careful in the beginning than I am later. A lot more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I say, I don't think one size fits all, and I think we need to do different things at different stages. And you just described it beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, thanks.
I remembered the fourth one if you want to know.
Oh, I do.
So
Thank you.
the other one is sort of using imagery. So taking the imagery that the client uses throughout the hour to really heighten or reflect that and heighten that. So if the client's saying, it felt like I was walking through that door again, and I can kind of use that in the reflective team to really heighten that experience. I can really see how walking through that door might have really impacted you, or it felt like you were um, I'm thinking of one client where she says, like, I feel like I'm bleeding out. So like if a client were to say that, the reflective team can really heighten that. Oh yeah, I can really see how you felt like you were bleeding out when you were feeling so alone and feeling so empty in that experience. And that really helps the client feel like, oh, someone is really hearing my story at that time. So outside of the primary therapist. So.
This is so helpful and interesting to me. We work when I'm working with students. So if this is something I've been doing for 20 years, is we do demonstrations in front of the students where the students are reflecting on the therapist's behavior, but not on the client, because the client is generally another student or a staff member, and we're sort of saying we're not that client, quote unquote, is not really looking for everyone to analyze them in this moment. So we're analyzing the therapist, but it's which gets at similar kinds of responses from what I haven't been calling a reflecting team, but the group that's listening. But it really is making me think it would be very interesting to do the other part of talking about the client and bringing that in.
But that's a very powerful way of training.
It's interesting. Yeah.
What you're doing is very powerful to train like that. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. It scares the pants off of the people when they're starting, because they're afraid I'm going to make them do it. I'm going to be the therapist, but we don't make them do it too early, at least. Yeah.
What school are you working with?
I just have students from, so we're taking a Northeastern student this year. I'm so excited. But we get a lot from SSA. Now it's not SSA. What is it called? Crown, social work. And then I got somebody from Adler. We've got some people from National Louis and some from, who do we have this year? We've had Chicago School folks, and so a range. Yeah.
So I want to say something more about narrative therapy with the little time that we have left. So so far we've gone through, in addition to other frameworks, we've gone through the developmental framework, we've gone to the solution focused framework, the systemic framework, and now this month we did the narrative framework. Next month it's going to be EFT. And the month after that, it's going to be, I'm not sure what title it's going to have, but it's going to be neuroscience and couples therapy. So that's my plan for a couple of the upcoming. But the narrative therapy, as I said earlier, Jill Friedman and Jean Combs, they're local.
Yeah.
They have the training center in Evanston, Illinois. I tried to give you in the modules and framework, I tried to give you the website so that you can get, we did Gottman too. I tried to give you the website so you can get the training if you want. You haven't seen Gottman yet. Gottman, okay. I don't remember which ones are coming next, but anyway, I always try to give you the website so that if you're interested in more training, you can find out where to get more training on that particular framework. The narrative is probably the only one, although there may be another local one that I'm going to mention in upcoming modules. This one is local, and they do a great job with it.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. So, okay.
Can I just make one last comment? I'm not quite sure. I was getting caught up on my listening to the modules, but I just wanted to let you know the way that you give request feedback. I really appreciated that reminder. I don't remember if it was a module 5 or 6 that you were saying. One of the things that I took away was the question of how is what we're doing impacting your relationship or your life? And I'm paraphrasing what you said, but that was like I need to frame it a little bit differently rather than like, what was helpful about today. I need to know a little bit more beyond just the hour, and something about the way you phrased it in one of the modules I really, really liked. So I just wanted to kind of let you know I appreciated that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So spread the word. If you like the content, spread the word.
Mhm.
I'm gonna
Absolutely.
I'm gonna do another launch in May.
Okay.
I did one in February, and because this is the first year and I'm tweaking, I'm trying to get to the 12-month content. And I don't know what's going to happen in the second year. I'm hoping that in the second year, the discussions can be more personal and more growth oriented if people want to stay longer. Uh,
Mhm.
but I haven't gotten there yet. But I do need the word to be spread uh,
Mhm.
so that there are more people who can take advantage. I get a lot of good feedback about the material.
Mhm.
And so I really appreciate Michael and I appreciate everybody. I appreciate you, Carolyn, too. You've given me some great feedback before. I'm hearing from many people the material is great, it's not overwhelming, it's not a lot. Um, and so I'm hoping that, by word of mouth, the program will grow.
Mhm. I think it will. Yes.
Okay, thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye. Thank you
Bye-bye.
for your input.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.